Welcome to Mindfulness Alchemy for the Modern Soul. Thank you for viewing, liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thank you for helping the channel grow. And thank you for helping this recording write the algorithm so it can get to as many people as possible who would enjoy it just as much as you do. I really appreciate it, so keep it coming. My name is Esther Vidic, and I'm your designated spiritual life, therapeutic art life, and trauma informed coach. And in today's recording, I invite you to take a walk with me and let's explore the concept of heaven and hell through the lens of what they represent as emotional states in our human experience and how we can live our own hell or heaven depending on where our emotional state is anchored on the emotional spiral. Now, the starting point of all of this is has its roots in Christian and more specifically Catholic concepts and teachings. But I'm approaching this topic as personal heaven and hell. And I'll explain what I mean. So come, walk with me. And I'll unpack in a second the seven deadly sins and the seven heavenly virtues, and I'll place them on the descending or ascending spiral of the emotional spiral. So let's begin. Let's start then with the seven deadly sins and what they mean as emotional states and frequencies. So let's start with gluttony. And gluttony means excess in eating or drinking. Now, what I'm about to say as an example, please understand this is not shaming anybody. This is just I find it a really good way to explain this concept. So here it goes. Let's look at gluttony through the lens of an emotional eater, a person who eats in response to big emotions and stress, perhaps. So they turn to food to feel some sort of release or comfort. But unfortunately, many times this coping mechanism makes them feel a sense of shame and guilt. Now, shame and guilt are located at the very bottom of the descending spiral, and therefore I would call this hell. Now, another deadly sin is envy. And the definition of envy is a feeling of resentful longing arised by someone else's possessions, qualities, or luck. Now, envy and jealousy are also on the descending spiral when it comes to one's emotional state and frequency. Next one is sloth, a reluctance to work or make an effort equals to laziness. Now, let's take a look at what can cause laziness. And the answer to that might just be in low self esteem and self doubt. And hear me out. Self doubt and low self esteem can lead to laziness because it can cause people to feel like that they are not good enough. They don't feel good enough to participate in life and in the world or to contribute. And this can cause people to retreat to a safe place, their own space, and feel that doing nothing is much better than stuffing things up. Self doubt and low self esteem are very much on the descending spiral. Now, the next thing is anger. And anger, as we know, is on the descending spiral. And then let's have a look at pride. Now, the definition of pride is a feeling of deep pleasure or satisfaction derived from one's own achievements, the achievements of those with whom one is closely associated, or from qualities or possessions that are widely admired. Now, let's look at pride through the lens of distortion and excess. Let's look at pride as an extreme. When one places oneself above others, thinks of oneself superior to the rest, looking down on others who are less or perceived less, have less, achieved less, and so on. And this leads to disconnection from the collective, and it also leads to resentment and perhaps even hate. And those emotions are very much on the downward spiral. Now, let's have a look at lust. The definition of lust is strong sexual desire or an overwhelming desire or craving. Now, overwhelm is at the upper end of the downward spiral. However, it can lead one further down the spiral depending on what happens to lust one feels, if it's expressed outwardly and if it is suppressed. And I'll leave this one up to your imagination. But let's take a look at greed. Now, greed is an intense and selfish desire for something, especially wealth, power, or even food. Now, this is easy to interpret, and greed, just like lust, can be the catalyst for descending furthermore on the downward spiral. So, as you can see, all of the above mentioned seven deadly sins, when interpreted as emotional states, are quite hellish, especially when one is anchored to them and experiences them as one's neutral emotional state. But now, let's have a look at the seven heavenly virtues. And the first one is chastity. And this basically means refraining from extramarital or especially from all sexual activity, which we associate with purity. But here I would say purity not just in its traditional interpretation, but perhaps purity of intention, purity of thought, and outward actions. Expressed perhaps as peace, gratitude, forgiveness, and empathy. And all of those are very high vibrational emotional states on the ascending spiral. Now, let's have a look at temperance, the quality of moderation or self restraint. So, we can interpret it as self discipline and perhaps the empowerment that comes from that. And empowerment as such, it is very much on the upward spiral. Charity, the voluntary giving of help, generosity and being service to others are surely on the ascension spiral. Diligence, careful and persistent work or effort. And as such, it perhaps requires trust, as in trust in the process, learning and personal growth, and maybe even a calm optimism in our efforts. Patience, kindness, and humility are all considered heavenly virtues, and they are on the ascending spiral when it comes to one's emotional state or frequency. So, to sum it up, I would say when we are anchored on the ascending emotional spiral, we are experiencing our own personal heaven. And when we are traveling down the descending spiral, we land ourselves in our own personal hell. And look, we don't have to be of the Catholic faith to explore the concept of heaven and hell in our personal lives. Perhaps this is just another way to look at it all and learn from its wisdom. It is perhaps just another way to explore and grow our understanding. And I hope you found this recording empowering, and educational. And I'll leave you with all of this for now, but I hope to see you next time.